So here we can see this significant trend. And something very interesting here is that this trend is related to the economic policies that they have been implementing in Latin America. So if we look at the economic history in Latin America pretty quickly here, we will find that we can divide this period of time in 1975 to 2008, in the 1970s to current period, in three phases. We can call about three phases. The first, which is the phase that took place before the debt crisis of 1982. Then the type of strategy that these countries follow was an inward-looking development strategy, where these countries implemented policies of protectionism. We also had state-led industrialization, and then we also had a strong control of the government, right, over the economy. Well, after the debt crisis, we had that countries realized that that was not working, and they had to move away from that strategy. Well, they had to move towards the neoliberal approach, and we saw a lot of countries moving towards that, where it kind of explains, right, that in the 1990s we see this decrease of leftist presidents, and if we look at the rightist graph here, then we see this increase during the 1990s, right, is when it reaches its peak. And during that period of time, these countries have to follow structural reforms, where in these structural reforms they were following fiscal discipline, tax reform, deregulation, privatization, and they were also more implementing liberal trade policies. Well, it is argued actually that if we look at the current situation, we'll kind of think about 2000, what is going on in 2000. Some scholars have argued that in several countries in the region, we are observing a combination of these two forms of strategies of development. And some people have liked to call it the neoliberal Latin American developmental welfare state. So a combination of a neoliberal approach, right, where we have also kind of like a type of state-led industrialization. So therefore here we can see how these trends kind of tell us a little bit about the economic history in the region. Well, when we talk about the left in Latin America, it is important to define what does it mean to be a left party in Latin America. And Castañeda, which is the biggest scholar on Latin American development, he likes to define as a political ideology where the main goals are to promote equality, democracy, and social improvement. So here pretty much we say that these parties will try to promote those goals, and then some of the parties, the left movement may focus on getting to those goals, but they may achieve those objectives at the expense of macroeconomic orthodoxy, wealth creation, and international cooperation, and also efficiency. So therefore, when we talk again, now that's what I want to move into this discussion between the difference between the radical left and the pragmatic left. Those who have a sharp turn to the left and those who have experienced a slight turn to the left. And here we can see, right, that this is related to the type of, to the way in which they pursue these goals, right, at the expense of efficiency or macroeconomic orthodoxy. So I will start talking about the radical left. Well, with the radical left, we have seen that the radical left is very nationalist. They are these type of movements, they are very vocal against the United States. They are also vocal about anti-capitalism, right? And in this case, we see that they have been using macroeconomic populism in order to gain support from their constituents. And here, with macroeconomic populism, we refer to the approach that focuses on promoting growth and equality and through government spending, right? So here we see a lot of government spending that tries to promote growth and equality, but this approach actually ignores the problems that this government spending can mean for inflation and deficit financing. So here we see that because these type of movements are focusing on macroeconomic populism, we have seen a significant increase on the control of the state over the economy, right? We see that there is more government involvement. And then when we talk about their political approach. So here, their political rhetoric. We can say that the type that these movements have been working is that they make use of populism ideas of when we define populism, we say that it is actually a combination of different groups. And here we see that these type of movements follow that approach. But something very important about these movements is that they tend to focus on a personalistic form of democracy. So here we tend to see that these movements are going to give a lot of power to the president, right? And they are also going to create this national identity. And it is interesting to see how these movements are able to bring some cultural symbols to make sure that they're able to create this strong identity. Like, for example, in the case of Evo Morales, he likes to bring the coca leaf very often to his political discourse, right, so that he can make the nation to be identified with the indigenous population. Right? Then in the case of Chavez, he likes to refer a lot to Bolivar to relate to independence in Latin America. Right? So here we see that that is the approach that they are taking. And in this case, that it is very personalistic form of democracy. Well, then we have the other type of left, and here that is, I like to call it the slight turn to the left, because in this case, when we think about those countries that they are classified more as this mild version of the left, we say that they have a more moderate approach. So thus, in some sense, they still pursue the goals that we mentioned before, but they pursue these goals, but make sure that while they pursue those goals, they still continue to have macroeconomic stability. So here they are more fiscally disciplined, right? And they are also more careful about inflation. So in some sense, they still believe in the market. They still make sure that even if they increase government spending to support social programs, they are going to make sure that that doesn't affect the market mechanisms that they are in place. So in this case, when we look at the political rhetoric of these movements, they also have this idea of social inclusion and social mobilization. And here, in their political rhetoric, they talk about this idea of nosotros, we, right, in their institutional discourse. And they do that with a purpose. It is argued that in Latin America, there is this increasing demand for social citizenship. So they're trying to be appealing to the mass, and then they are also going to be using some populism techniques to get their constituents to follow them, right? But the difference here is that they don't have such a personalistic form of democracy as we see on the other group, right? So here we see that they have a more moderate approach in terms of their political approach. In these type of countries, we don't see a radical change to their constitutions to give more power to the president, right? It's a different approach. It's a more, it is argued that it's really like a mild and bend way of following the left in Latin America. Well, so here's another picture, right? And here the picture looks a little bit different, and I wanted to show it to you. So here what I do is just kind of classify them a little bit different now, right? Since we know there are different movements in Latin America, well, I'll classify now and say, before it all looked red, now I have like different tones of red. So if we look at the dark red, that's what I like to call it the radical left, right? And then the lighter red will be the pragmatic left. And then the kind of like orangey one, that will be the center left, right? So our picture looks a little bit different. But here with the radical left, the common countries that they're associating into these leftist movements are Argentina, Bolivia, Cuba, of course, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, right? Well, with the pragmatic left, we can think about Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Panama, and Uruguay. Those are the countries that they are more related to the pragmatic left. And this is important. When we want to understand the leftist movement in Latin America, we need to keep in mind that there is this distinction.